Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Or if you're watching later, thank you for watching. I'm Lelia from One More Page Books. We're an independent bookstore in Arlington, Virginia, which is pretty close to DC, if you're watching from far away. Thanks for tuning in. We're just so excited to have these three authors with us tonight. And I'm going to try and do their amazing books justice by talking to them about them. But I seriously was so blown away by all three books. And I just want to say happy Pride Month to everyone. I think every month should be Pride Month in a way, but this one is we're happy to have an excuse to celebrate these amazing books, but everyone should read more queer books every month of the year. So I just want to start with a quick content warning, just because we might touch on some plot points that are going to talk about transphobia, dysphoria, or misgendering. It just might come up. I just wanted to do a quick warning on that front. And I just want to say a huge thank you to these authors, not just for writing these books, but for being here and talking about them with us. So thank you all so much. If we were in person, I'd do a round of applause. So I'll do my own homebound round of applause for you. And also I want everyone who's watching to know that you are welcome to include your own questions as we're going. And then towards the end, I'll try and go through and maybe address some of those. So feel free to leave a question about that if you have anything you want to ask the authors. And you can buy all of their books from us from One More Page Books, and they'll be signed and we can ship them to you. So I'll put the link in the comment section over there. So keep an eye out for that. All right, so I'm going to do a quick intro for everybody. First, I did alphabetically. Zabe, writing as ZR Ellor, is an author and literary agent from the Washington, D.C. area. An avid lifelong reader, he wrote his first novel when he was 12 years old and never put down his pen. He graduated from Cornell University in 2016 with a dual degree in biology and English literature. His non-literary interests include running, travel, and global cuisine. May the Best Man Win is his debut novel. My prop copy here, but you can also see it on the big screen. Beautiful, beautiful. Next, we have Isaac Fitzsimons. He's a lifetime dabbler in the arts. His background includes performing sketch comedy in college, learning how to play 3 songs on the banjo. That is 3 more than me, so well done. And of course, writing. He currently lives outside the DC area and does research for an arts advocacy nonprofit in the city. And The Passing Playbook just came out this week, right? So
yep, Tuesday.
It's fresh off the new release over there. And then last but not least, we have Ray Stoeve. Ray Stoeve is a writer. They received a 2016-2017 Made at Hugo House Fellowship for their young adult fiction and created the YA middle grade trans and non-binary voices master list, a database that tracks all books in those age categories written by trans authors about trans characters. They contributed to Take the Mic, fictional stories of everyday resistance. Between Perfect and Real is their debut novel. When they're not writing, they can be found gardening, making art in other mediums, or hiking their beloved Pacific Northwest. And do my quick demonstration here. Beautiful, beautiful. Awesome. Thank you all again so much for being here. Like I said, I read your books and they were amazing. So good. The characters are so strong. I completely was engrossed by them. If you don't mind, would you all do a quick summary or just elevator pitch of your books for anyone who might not be familiar with them?
Sure, yeah. So May the Best Man Win is a YA contemporary novel about a trans boy challenging his ex in an all-out battle to be homecoming king.
Oh, you had me by the premise on that one. I was so intrigued.
And The Passing Playbook is a YA rom-com about a boy named Spencer who starts at a new school where nobody knows that he's transgender, and he joins the soccer team and everything is going well until he's benched because his birth certificate still says female. So then he has to decide whether to come out and fight the ruling or stay stealth. Coming out would mean coming out to everyone, including the teammate he's falling for, but staying stealth would mean he'd have to watch the rest of the season on the bench.
And Between Perfect and Real is about Dean, who is a closeted trans boy out as a lesbian. And then when he's cast as Romeo in the school play, he realizes that he wants to come out and transition.
Thank you so much. And we've seen all the covers, so everyone can ooh and ah over them. It's so reading the books. It was so interesting to me to see how the main characters in your books, are all at very different points in their journeys, and also in coming out, or whether they're out or out again in some cases. And I just thought they complement each other so well, the three of them. And Dean is just coming out as trans, and Jeremy is sort of. I love the way that Lucas observes this. I think at a later point in the book, that he's trying to prove himself to the school, and Spencer is at a new school and is not out as trans. And I just thought, what made you decide to examine your character at that point in the journey?
Yeah, well, I think for me, so with Jeremy, what I really wanted to capture is like, I think there's these discussions we have, and like I was very specific in, I'm setting this in a Maryland prep school, like in the DC suburbs, in this area that thinks it's very liberal. And Jeremy, he's a white boy, he's from a wealthy family, he has access to a lot of privilege and financial resources, kind of mirroring how I grew up in the area where I live in. And so I think there's kind of like an assumption that like, oh, it's not really that bad to be trans, because like everyone understands that you can't be transphobic, and they have to be accepting, and just, okay, yes, like you come out as trans and you tell everyone your new name and pronouns, and they use those and everything is fine. And so one of the specific things I wanted to explore with Jeremy, that was really just drawing from my own personal experiences, is how people who think they're not transphobic, and people who think they know how to treat trans people, how even being in that environment can be transphobic and isolating, because a lot of the time sometimes people think they're good allies, but they don't practice that. And so that's really why I wanted to focus on these early weeks in my character's transition, when everyone is still getting used to him presenting as male at school, and to showcase how in this very, very emotionally vulnerable time in his life, like how the people around him react, and how that shapes him in return.
It's a great, I thought it was so interesting. Like you said, now I'm realizing like you don't feel like, it's, somewhere in the South where it's very overt. I mean, there is some, but you really do notice the smaller things about the classmates who just aren't as progressive as they think they are, and how they're approaching, trying to being respectful. So I thought that's really, it was such a cool environment to feel. So, I mean, I guess to be fair, I went to school in this area, so it felt very familiar to me. I was like, oh, that's right. These are how the students I went to school with would act. So thank you for sharing that. Sorry. Ray, what about you?
I really liked what you said, Zabe. Just similarly, that was something I wanted to explore too, from like a different point in transition. How does Dean's relationships with other people and with himself change as he decides to come out and be more open? But I think for me, I decided to write a coming out story. It wasn't really much of a not choice exactly, but a thought out decision, because of the time that I first had the idea, and then when I started writing it in earnest, trans awareness was still just starting to become a thing. And it's really amazing how much more awareness there has been, and just in the time period of writing the book, 5 or 6 years or so. But I, had started coming out around the time that I started writing the book. And so coming out and all the kind of questions that come with it was very much on my mind. And I had read, coming out stories as a teen for gay teenagers, and wanted to kind of write that story from a trans perspective, but also in a different way than the stories that I had read as a teen, which were primarily like tragic in nature, and usually ended with the main character, you know, experiencing something horrible. And so while Dean does have plenty to struggle with in the book, I also wanted it to be a story about him finding joy and finding out who he is and finding the people who will love him and support him in that.
It does feel really special to sort of see Dean on that trajectory from the very early, you know, piece of the story. So you're with Dean on that whole. It was really special to sort of feel that for him.
Thank you.
Isaac, what about you?
So I wanted to write for the generation of trans kids who have access to hormone blockers and who don't have to go through a puberty that doesn't align with their gender identity. And this topic just really interested me because so often when we hear these stories, it's negative in the press. But I want to show like the positive sides of it, and having a kid with supportive parents who goes to a school that it says that it's progressive. We see how progressive it actually is, and really explore the question of what happens when you transition and you pass completely. And there's always going to be a moment when you have to choose to come out. And so you don't have to come out to everyone, and you don't always have to come out, but there's always a question for trans people about like, when do I come out? And that's kind of what I wanted to explore in the book. So I have a character who's young, he's only 15, and he's been out for a couple of years now and has had access to hormone blockers and now testosterone just starting. So I really wanted to show his journey where he completely passes as a boy and see how he's going to react in his new situation in his new school.
I loved the coming out moment for him with his mom. I think that was a really just a beautiful scene, and it was really not sappy. It's not, which, you know, I don't want anyone listening to this who hasn't read it to think that, but it was a beautiful moment between those two characters and so simple. And I think, like you said, we need all these stories of different. We need every coming out story. We need more stories. We need stories about, you know, coming out to someone that they've just met, coming out to your parents. And I think it's so great to see all these characters and how they all did that in their own ways. So you, one of the, obviously high school is a pretty big feature of a lot of young adult, and especially in your books. And we've talked about sort of how the setting and the background characters and the way people react is a really important piece of that. How did your high school experience affect how, if at all, how you wrote your story? Ray, why don't we start with you, since you're diagonal for me?
Sure. I think like one way that I sort of was influenced in my experience is thinking of like the group of friends. In high school, I had a really like core group of friends. And we like moved together like as a group, you know, we like had our own, you know, jokes and all that jazz. And so thinking of Dean's friend group, I wanted to create for him a similar kind of feeling of like this tight-knit group of folks, but one where everyone is queer. There are a few other queer kids in my high school group of friends who were varying levels of out. Some of them have only come out in recent years. But for me in high school, I was one of the only out kids at my whole high school. So it was sort of a different experience than what Dean has. And then, of course, also I was a theater kid in high school, and I actually was in a production of Romeo and Juliet in senior year. Although I was a henchman, I wanted to play Mercutio, but that did not come to pass. And so in thinking about this book and thinking about Dean, the whole premise of the book started there with like thinking about like, what if I had been able to, what if, you know, what would it be like for a kid just figuring out their gender to be cast in a role that is more gender affirming.
I love the theater background, and it's so interesting to know that you were in theater too, because I think that really creates. You all have such great, you know, the soccer, theater, cheering, and also just the homecoming journey as well are all such vivid high school experiences. So yeah, thank you. Zabe, what about you? Was there anything?
Yeah, well, I think with homecoming, I grew up in the DMV. I went to TJ. That's over in over in Alexandria. So yeah, so it's so one of the things we did each year was we had this massive homecoming celebration. It was just like this really big deal, and so that was really the basis for the homecoming celebration in the book. Was just like it's this big production, you know, these really competitive, driven teenagers who just want to put on this massive show with, you know, skits and spirit days and like really creative homecoming askings and like really creative like pranks, who have all this energy and who are just like always also trying to one up each other. And so that was something I really wanted to bring in kind of as the central piece of world building in creating this story. I mean, I was like huge into homecoming back in high school. Like I would make all these spirit day competitions. You know, I would start really early. I think one year we did like a Star Wars themed homecoming, and so like I was like me and four of my friends who are like, all right, we'll go as Han, Luke, Leia, and Chewbacca. And so I was like, I'll be Chewbacca because that's going to be the hardest one. And so like I got like this costume and I like hand sewed all this faux fur onto this costume. Like it took me hours. Like I made like this little bandolier out of plastic. I just like made everything myself. And then I show up on the Cerate and some kid got like a store-bought like $400 Chewbacca costume and looks incredible. So yeah, so that was really a big element of my high school experience that I wanted to bring into the story.
I am livid on your behalf for past you. That's such a cop out. I'm so sorry, but that sounds like it sounds like yours was amazing.
I had a lot of fun,
and it's so funny because I was not, I don't think, involved in any homecoming shenanigans when I was in high school. So it was so cool to read and find myself really just so invested in how that was going to go. So I that was a really amazing high stakes, especially with his ex being the primary. I love the, okay, we'll get to that with my next question. I'm sorry. Isaac, what about you? Was there anything from your high school experience you wanted to put in the book or not put?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a pretty tough time in high school, and so I think I wrote a more idealized version of like what I wish high school would have been like for me at the time. And it's funny, Ray, you mentioned like the friend group. Like I did stage crew, and so many of like my friends who I was with in high school, they have all like come out as queer or trans, but nobody knew at the time. So I kind of want to write like that idealized version. I didn't do sports, so I feel like a bit of an imposter. But the coach is based on my PE teacher, who was this guy who I think he coached like the JV football team and was also the PE teacher, and he really didn't care about PE. So he was the one who would just like sit and read men's health magazines like while we were doing PE and really didn't care. But actually like took more inspiration from my college. So the book is set in a town called Apple Creek, which is a real town in Ohio, and I went to college in a town nearby. And so there are a couple of things like the fall fair, which was like the state fair that we went to with like the sketchy carnival rides. And then there's the ice cream place that actually exists in, I think it's actually in Worcester, in the town that I went to the college in. So it's more, I took like the setting is more college, the events are kind of more college, but I took a bit from high school.
That's so interesting. And my cousin actually went to Worcester, so
everybody goes
really,
to Worcester.
Yeah, right. It's great. I'm really surprised that I didn't play soccer because I, for some reason in my head really was like, oh yeah, I'm sure this is all based on Isaac's soccer experience. But and you're a big soccer fan watching soccer, right? I think you said
I watched
Manchester City. Okay.
Soccer. Yeah, I have that Manchester City there.
That's really cool. Well, thank you all for sharing your pieces of high school experience. It's funny how that sort of stuff sticks with us. So I tease a little bit of this, but a big element of all your characters' sort of stories is a dynamic with a love interest, whether it's at the beginning or the middle or the end of the book. And it was so heartbreaking at times. So well done. You really had some daggers in the hearts, but also some really beautiful moments. And those relationships feel so electric in the stories. I'm curious, do you enjoy writing romance in a book? Did you feel like you had to include it because it's so expected in young adult? And does it make you feel satisfied as an author when your readers tell you that you made them cry? Isaac, let's start with you, because yours is sort of, it's a new love, they're meeting for the first time.
Yeah, and so I, the inspiration for the book was a radio story that I heard, and the radio story wasn't romantic, but I turned it romantic. So it was a boy teaching another boy how to play "Can't Help Falling in Love" by Elvis Presley on guitar. And so I took that idea and turned it into a romance, and I wrote to that scene, which is like one of my favorite scenes in the book. So I definitely like writing romance. It's funny because I don't read, I guess like in books I read it if it's in the book, but I don't like seek out romance, and I don't watch it. And so like right now I'm writing rom-com, and like all I watch is like procedurals and like death shows, and I'm like, I should probably not do this because it's not great for my writing. But I love like reading it in books. I love when people cry, except that in my launch event, Julian Winters cried, and I felt bad like seeing him cry. But when I hear people cry, I love it. But when I have to watch them cry, then I feel bad. But when people cry, when people tell me they cry when they read a book, I love it. It's like my favorite thing to hear. It's
like a badge of honor, I feel like. I well done, all of you, on that front. But it must be really special to know what an impact you've had on a reader. But yeah, like you said, if you have to see it, then that's just, that's too far. Then you feel guilty, right? But wow, okay, thank you for, I thought the relationship is so, it's just, I was really rooting for them, and it was beautiful to see them meet, and then sort of, you're like, oh, teammates, maybe more. So, and I think Justice is such a great character, and they both sort of are very different, but you get to see both of their stories and how that unfolds. Zabe, what you have actually a dual point of view in your book. So that's, I think, kind of a cool, you really get to see Lucas's point of view as well, which is a very different, and he's as the ex, it's sort of, I don't know, I thought that was such a cool concept to go into. I love a rivals to lovers, or exes to lover. Not to say that they end up together or anything. I just think that it's a beautiful dynamic to start off.
I mean, come on, like with a cover like this, like that those lips have to touch.
Exactly right. I was just like, come on, you can feel the longing.
Yeah, that was, I love writing romances. I think like the second I realized I could write a gay romance is when I started really enjoying writing romances, because before, when I just started writing romances, I was just writing heterosexual stuff, and that was like back during like when the Hunger Games was big and like Divergent was big, and so it's like, okay, like I was just getting my start, and I was like, okay, so there's a girl and there's a guy, and like maybe there's another guy, and like they have this conflict over the girl, and so it kind of felt like it was included, but then I realized that like, oh, like I can write this other way, and like I can do that, and then it started to be like less a requirement and more like something I really enjoyed, because what I really like about writing romance is creating emotional connections between characters who are very different and who have very different goals. And so that's what I really liked about writing Jeremy and Lucas and writing them kind of in this dual POV, is because we see what their goals are and we see what's kind of going on in their life and how they're kind of bouncing off each other. I think like, the reason I actually, when I started writing the book, I was writing from Lucas's POV first. So I wrote some of his chapters first, because I wanted to write kind of how he sees Jeremy's transition and kind of how he's dealing with it, because so much of Jeremy's stress is he doesn't know how Lucas sees him and how Lucas really feels about his transition. And so like I wanted it to be clear, like, you know, I just like wanted to write this incredibly loving scene. I think it's like in chapter 2 where like Lucas is thinking about how much he cares about Jeremy, and like he's frustrated and he is angry and he's upset by the way Jeremy is treating him, but he only like feels that way because he loves Jeremy so much and because Jeremy has not been kind to him. And so that's I really wanted to write a romance at the core of this book because I wanted to write about a trans person who is loved and who is wanted and cared about, you know, even when he wasn't really being his best self. I wanted to write about a trans person loving and being loved very deeply.
It's so that you really feel like when you're reading the connection that Jeremy and Lucas have and the history that they have together. And it's just, it really, it feels, you really understand, like, and I think you were seeing both their points of view on each other as they're, like you said, not at their best necessarily. It really helps you understand both characters more by seeing them through the other's eyes. And I thought it was really special to get, like you said, to see that how much they care about each other, even if they're not together, but they have that history. And Ray, yours is a sort of a similar dynamic in that the characters are together and then Dean comes out as trans to his girlfriend. But that's pretty early on in the book. So what was your experience like writing a romance into, or any element of romance in your book?
Yeah, well, I love romance. I'm a huge romantic. I'm just like a total sap in real life. And I love reading romance. And I love writing it. And I love feeling it. So that was fun. And I think with Dean, oh man, it's hard to figure out how to talk about the relationship without spoiling anything.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Oh. With Dean and Zoe, I think I wanted to explore both like that feeling of being a teenager and being so infatuated with somebody else, but also having just come into your own sense of identity and being very protective of that identity. And then what happens when like the feelings as well as the like, no, this is who I am, starts to clash, or is like in tension in some way. And I think that Dean and Zoe are like both care about each other and love each other very much. And also they have more to learn, and they have, and I think that I'm just interested in exploring like not only like the like fun beginning stages of a romance and like happy endings and all that jazz, but also like mistakes that happen and imperfections and what happens when your imperfections meet the other person's imperfections, and just like all the nuances of what it's like to be like in love with someone else. And so I tried to do that with Dean and Zoe. And just have to say a sidebar that like, I love Lucas and Jeremy so much. I'm like such a fan of them forever. And I just love how much Lucas loves Jeremy. And I just want Jeremy to like believe that he's loved by Lucas. And it's like such a satisfying, just like arc.
It takes a lot to get through Jeremy's.
Yes. Oh my God. Just trust and believe. So, and Isaac, I'm excited to read your love story as well, because that sounds so freaking cute. Oh my gosh.
It is adorable. It's just the sweetest thing.
You all really hit it out of the park with the romantic relationships in your book. And Ray, it's so cool. This was like 2 years ago, I think, that someone was saying, like, it was just a random like tweet or something, like, why isn't there more YA with like characters who are in a relationship, that are like exploring that experience of high school, because that does happen. It's not all like, oh, we met like butterflies, like da, 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 and then so I think it's really great to get to see sort of an example of that too, and to such a relatable sort of intense dynamic there. So I'm also a huge romance fan, by the way, Ray. So we can swap romantic reading recommendations at the end here. This is a great question that Zave came up with here, actually. Then this is in relating to yours, Zave, but I think it can apply also to Isaac and Ray. What specific challenges did you face in updating the rom-com tropes to a story with queer characters? And this is also a side note for everybody to be thinking about. What is your favorite trope as a reader and a writer? I want to know that too after.
Yeah, so for me, it was like, it was kind of challenging because when I was writing this, like, I've talked a lot about how I was writing this. I wrote this book in 3 weeks, and looking back, like, I wrote it in 2018, and I think what was going on at the time I was writing, it was actually, I was drafting this book right at the time of the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. And so like I told my agent, like, hey, I have this idea for a rom-com. It's about a trans boy, and like he's challenging his ex for homecoming king. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and write this. And so I was like, so kind of, but the mindset I was in was, it was the middle of the Trump administration. Trans people had been banned from serving in the military. Protections on trans healthcare were being rolled back, and now we were facing the possibility of a Supreme Court that would no longer protect LGBTQ rights. And so obviously, as I was thinking back on the rom-coms I grew up with, like, oh, like 27 Dresses and like 10 Things I Hate About You, you can't really, I couldn't really tell those same, I wasn't really in the, I didn't feel like I could tell those same jokes and also tell kind of an authentic story about what I was feeling in the moments, because like, we have all these like jokes and all these tropes that apply to heterosexual relationships that don't necessarily apply to gay relationships or trans relationships. And especially like in the place where I was writing, like the jokes and the humor in the manuscript, like a lot of it is a little darker and a little more sarcastic, because but a lot of the jokes come out of very real conversations I was having with other queer and trans people, in the time that I was working on the book. So, and I've had some people say like, oh, this book isn't really a rom-com because like it's so dark and serious. And I think to me it's a rom-com, but it's it's a rom-com about being trans in the late 20-teens, and really how that felt. And so the humor and the jokes and kind of the funniness and the absurdity of it really does come out of trying to be like, okay, I want this romantic story and I want it to be funny, but it does have an edge that I don't think a heterosexual book, perhaps set in a different time and place, would have that same edge.
That's really interesting. You say about the saying that there are dark elements, that is because that it's not a rom-com, or that it's too dark to be a rom-com. Because when you say 10 Things I Hate About You, I think that's such a different, that movie has not dark elements, but it does have sort of an edge compared to like When Harry Met Sally. And I think that rom-coms and the way that we're digesting those tropes changes to reflect what it is that we're living in. And I think that your book really does it, is a great reflection of sort of what the rom-com of right now needs to be, especially for a high schooler. But yeah, I loved getting to see the tropes that come through in your. I love Tropes. I'm a huge fan of Tropes. I just want everyone to know that who's watching. Tropes are great. We need tropes in all kinds of new takes on tropes. So yeah.
And my favorite trope is very much enemies to lovers.
Yes.
So that was really what I was channeling here.
Love that. As a writer and reader?
But yes, as a writer and a reader, just enemies to lovers, just like inject it into my veins. I'll take all the enemies to lovers.
All day. Let's make it a cookie. I'm going to have it for lunch. Okay. That's so funny because I think it'd be really hard to write enemies to lovers. So, but I also am not a writer, so maybe that's why. But yeah, that's amazing. Isaac and Ray, were there any tropes that you wanted to include in your book, and were you able to, or did you think like, oh, this won't work with my tone or my plot? And if not, do you just have a favorite trope that you like to write or read?
So one of my favorite tropes that is in the book is forced proximity, where the characters are forced to spend time together. And I love it because my actual favorite part of like writing and reading romances when I do read them in books is before they get together. Like kind of after they kiss, it's kind of boring to me because there's going to be the inevitable like second act breakup because of a stupid reason, and I don't like that part. But I love the tension, the butterflies, the flirting at the beginning. So forced proximity where they have to spend time together. Even better if they are enemies to lovers or rivals to lovers, and you get to see kind of the tension and the fighting. That's what I love, and that is included in my book.
It really is. I don't want to spoil anything, but if you like forced proximity and the tropes that are centered around that, you will love The Passing Playbook. That's all I'll say about that. I want to talk about it though, so read it, and then you guys, if someone tweet me and we'll discuss it. And as a reader too, is that another trope that you love, or do you have any other that you enjoyed reading versus writing?
No, I think that's probably, as a reader, I like that best as well.
Awesome. What about you, Ray?
I don't know. I don't know if I have a favorite. I don't, and I'm trying to think of like, since I didn't write B-Part like as a romance, like specifically, there's a romance in it, but I don't think of it as being like the central point of the plot, or like, yeah, I don't know. But I think like maybe a trope that's like, you can see shades of it in Dean and Zoe, and then there's more of it in my second YA, and then there's even more of it in, I'm drafting a proposal right now for my third, is like the kind of like, maybe like more serious main character. I don't know how serious Dean is. And then like the more bubbly, like sort of like extroverted love interest that kind of like draws them out of their shell. And so I enjoy that a lot, kind of like opposites attract sort of stuff. And then I do love the rivals to lovers, and I'm attempting to write for my third one. I guess, I don't know if I should talk about it, because maybe I shouldn't talk about it. I don't know if I'm illegally allowed to talk about it.
I know, I was going to say, ooh, tell me more, but also it sounds like probably you aren't supposed to, per, the writer code of publishers not wanting you to tell us things before they're announced. But
yes. Yeah. So, okay, I won't talk about that, but I do love Rivals to Lovers. I love slow burn anything. Like if it, like same with you, Isaac, like once the kiss happens, I'm like, okay, great, they're together, like whatever. But like, just draw that out as long as possible. Like the best, I think like one of the best examples of this for me is Red, White, and Royal Blue, where it was like, I was just like, come on.
Love the slow burn.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you guys so much for showing all those elements. We've talked a lot about sort of the settings in terms of the soccer, the theater, the cheer, the homecoming, and the high school. But the element of place in your books, especially Ray in yours, is such a interesting part of the story. How did you build Dean's world, and was it something that you built after you sort of had the character, or did it sort of come together at the same time?
It was all pretty tied together for me. Like I live in Seattle. I grew up here. And I have like a tiny pet peeve about accurate Seattle representation that I'm determined to like ride for in like all of my books. But for me, like growing up here, I feel like has shaped me so much. And this place has its own like unique dynamics of just like race and class and sexual orientation and I think an example of that is, you know, for Dean, thinking about Capitol Hill as the neighborhood, that was very much my experience as a teen. I only made it up to Capitol Hill a few times as a young person, but it was always, to me, this like kind of shining like place in my mind where like all the gay people lived and you could like walk down the street and gay people were everywhere. And like, I could go there and live there when I was an adult and be happy and gay. And so that was, that's a big part of Dean's world. And then also thinking about like, I think a big part of being a teen is you have like the places you go with your friends and the places you seek refuge and like the friend's house that you're always at. Like for Dean, that's Ronnie's house. Ronnie is his best friend. So he like knows where the hidden key is. You know, he knows about Ronnie's dynamics with his parents. And like I had that experience too. So like putting in the places that are special to me for various reasons into the book, to me, like a character, I don't know, like you're so influenced as a person by the place that you live. And I think that's obvious, Zabay, in your book too, and from your experience. And then Isaac, I don't know about yours, but when I read it, I'm sure I'll find out more. And so, yeah, that was just really important to me.
Zabay and Isaac, did you feel like the place for you when you were writing came together at the same time as the character, or did you sort of create that around the character after you really had an idea of what the story and the character were going to be?
Yeah, I think I wanted to write a DC book. I wanted to write a book that was like set here. There aren't a lot of them, which is kind of crazy considering how many people like live around here. But I really wanted to kind of work some of that unique flavor of kind of this side of this area that I knew into the book and kind of hopefully capture a little of that local culture.
I feel like, oh, sorry, yeah, you go ahead, Isaac.
No. So I sent my book in Ohio, and I said I went to college in Worcester, Ohio. And so Worcester's an interesting place because there's this tiny liberal arts town that apparently everybody goes to. Like at my job, people are associated with Worcester, and it's a tiny, tiny little college. So it's always wild when I hear other people who've gone there. But it's a tiny liberal arts college, so you get like professors in, you get students in from all over the country. So I'm originally from the DC area, but it's right in the middle of quite a conservative area. And it's also, Wayne County is one of the largest Mennonite and Amish population. So you do see the horse-drawn buggies going around. When I did student teaching in Apple Creek, there were several Amish students there, like in their Amish garb there. So it is kind of a place where there are these different like progressive people and then also people who aren't so progressive, and it's all kind of mixed up in one area. And so when I wanted to write a book that is about a topic that is now seen as polarizing, it seemed like the perfect setting for it because it has so many people there, different types of people with different viewpoints, so that it's really a good place to have conflict.
I'm glad you said that because the issue of of calling it polarizing or referring to sort of the clash between the progressive town and then the surrounding area is your book is so timely, and I hate that it is because we shouldn't have to be dealing with issues like this right now. But was it hard for you to write about a trans athlete who's not allowed to participate because of the letter on his birth certificate, with that being something that's being featured in the news so often? Or did that make it easier because you were sort of galvanized by the need for that to be represented? I feel like it could go either way. I'm sure it was really, really hard and maybe at times motivating.
Yeah, so it was a strange experience because I started writing in 2015, and we just had like a few, like the years previous, there have been a few like trans wins, like expanded healthcare, and it was looking better for trans people. And so when I started writing, I was doing research on the laws for athletes. And there's a website, I think it's just called like transathlete.com or transathlete.org, where it tracks the legislation. And they have a map of the United States. They classify states as like green states are ones that have laws that actively protect trans students. Yellow states are laws that they say that you have to match the gender on your birth certificate. Red states are laws that actively discriminate against trans students. And then gray states were the ones that don't have anything. And I think at the time of writing, Ohio was a gray state, which is one of the reasons why I chose Ohio, because I could sort of make the league have its own rule. And now it's a red state. And this happened pretty recently. And now you look at the map and it's covered in red states. So I think I wrote it kind of naively, believing that we would see more green states where we are right now. But obviously that's not the case. So writing it wasn't as challenging because I'd written it before, but what's been challenging now is this doing like the publicity around it and talking about it, because it is a topic that is so on people's minds. And so there's a documentary that just came out on Hulu, actually the same day my book, June 1st, and it's called Changing the Game, which follows trans student athletes and their right to play sports. And so I remember watching that when I was doing revisions, and I was like, oh, well, gotta like throw half my book away, because I felt like my book wasn't as realistic as what the actual portrayal is. But then I realized that the story that I'm writing, Spencer isn't even at the stage where these kids are in the documentary. These kids in the documentary are out, they're fighting for the rights to play, and Spencer is still trying to get there. So I feel like it's important to show that kids just want to play. Like Spencer, he's described as like 5'2". He just wants to play soccer, and that's like what he wants to do. So all the people who are using trans kids as political pawns, it's really disgusting. And so I hope that people read the book, they watch the documentary, they see stories of trans athletes playing and being supported by their teammates, and they realize that kids just want to play sport. It's not about winning, it's not about fairness, it's just about allowing all kids, the right to play.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and I hope that people will read your book and see that, because I mean, yeah, they're literally children, and they just want to participate in sports, and I think it's so, as an adult reading it, you feel so frustrated for Spencer, because he shouldn't have to choose between coming out as trans and fighting for that right, and not being and not playing soccer by not fighting it outwardly and outing himself. It's just no person should have to make that choice, and especially not a teenager. But yeah, it's again so important as authors that you will keep writing these amazing stories, and thank you for doing that. One of the things that, like I said, in Spencer's sort of crossroads, or his journey throughout the story, is really finding his voice, and I think can be said for all your books. And maybe with Jeremy, it's more finding out how to use his voice. But what do all of you hope that readers are going to take away from that experience that your character goes through in that journey? And do you hope that will encourage readers to find their own voice, or I guess that's ignore the last part of that question.
Yeah, I think I think kind of what I was writing, and this is kind of something Jeremy gets from me, is he doesn't really have any trouble finding his voice. He's very loud. He doesn't shut up. He's a very talkative guy. But I think what he kind of struggles with is learning how and when to use his voice, and how to use it in a positive way, and how to use his voice in a way that builds connections within his community, because I think it can be so isolating, and especially in the book, that he feels really isolated because he's going through all these experiences that are new and strange and nothing like he expected. and the people in his life, like his mom and the school principal and the people and the adults who he's relied on, they really aren't protecting him in the way they used to. And so I think what I want queer teenagers to take away from the book is the importance of building a queer community. And that's kind of what Jeremy learns, is that his queer friends and community can kind of be there for him when these other authority figures aren't. And and the queer community is not perfect, and there's a lot of struggle within that community. There's a lot of dialogue and debate and a lot of different issues that community is dealing with and trying to process, but that in the end it is the queer community, it is his friends, it is the people who care about him most, who will protect him when he needs it. And that's really what I want queer teenagers to take away from this book, is to find your community and find the people who will help take care of you when you need it, and to be a good member of that community in return.
I loved that, like you said, Jeremy is so loud. I thought that was such a real feeling, and it was but like you said, it is great how he learns to use that to create connections. It was really well done, and I mean, you wrote it amazingly well. That Ray, what do you hope that readers will take away from Dean's story?
Yeah, I think for me the most important thing about the story is like embracing the messiness that comes with figuring out who you are and who you want to be. I think, like, I know that I struggle with a lot of angst in transition specifically, but then also in general, because of narratives that were already out there about like how you were supposed to be a person, and then like how you were supposed to be trans. I'm hoping that by showing sort of like Dean's process, and then also showing the multiple queer and trans people around him who all have like their own unique like journeys and their own unique senses of self, that I can just put that out there for both for queer and trans teens, but then also, for people who like want to be allies and better supporters to the queer and trans people in their life. Although I didn't write the book as an educational tool, I am aware that it will be used and read that way. And so it was important for me to put in the education that I wanted people to have, rather than like the sort of mainstream narrative that I absorbed passively, growing up.
You put that so well. That's such I need to listen to that again and then just really think about it. That's such a good, like, knowing that it's going to be used that way, but not writing it with that intention. Wow. Thank you for that answer. Isaac, what about you? What about Spencer's voice?
So I feel like I wanted readers to get out that finding your voice is a process, that you don't have to immediately be out, proud, loud. I think for Spencer, he has gone through a significant trauma in the previous year, which I don't actually like. It's covered in like a paragraph in the book, and I did that on purpose because I didn't want to traumatize people if they were reading the book. And so, but he had just gone through trauma, and so throughout the book, he's healing from that trauma. He's building up that armor back up again, so that he's prepared to kind of fight for it. And I have a couple scenes that show him being an ally when other kids don't know he's trans. So there's one scene where he stands outside the bathroom for a non-binary student named Riley, who's uncomfortable using the bathroom. And that's like a small thing that people can do. And if standing outside a bathroom is too confrontational for you, you can go into the bathroom with them and help them out. There's small things you can do, like in conversation. You can, when you introduce a friend and people aren't sure what their pronouns are, you can very clearly say, like, this is my friend, they are, and then say whatever. And so there's really small ways that you can help, and everybody can do it, like trans people and cis people. And so I don't want people to read the book and think that they immediately have to become activists or have to become activists at all, but that everybody is responsible for like taking care and being kind to everyone else. And there are small ways that we can all help. We can all use our voice.
I'm so glad you mentioned the scene with Riley, because I feel like that was such a just and Riley's surprise at being that it was thought of. I think that was such a beautiful scene, and also just a great example of just a small thing that an ally can do that maybe someone who's cis might not occur to them, but is a good way to show support. Which and as Ray pointed out, even if you didn't write your book as an educational tool, in some cases people will use it that way. So wow, again, it's hard to balance, I'm sure, writing the story that you wanted to tell and also knowing all of that extra. And I think it's so much harder as a queer author, or writing a queer story rather, to just write the story you want without having to, there's so much extra things that you worry about with that. And I imagine that was very challenging for all of you. But you wrote these incredible stories with these phenomenal characters that really created such strong emotional reactions. So I'm so grateful. As a bookseller, it's great. I love being able to hand your books especially to a teen reader, but also to adult readers. And to know that it's going to be something that really sticks with them. So I just want to thank you so much, and thank you for being here with me, and for doing this panel, for writing the books you write and writing the stories you write. If you're able to tell us what you're working on next, please do, and we can look out for your next book. No rush. Obviously, you all just published a book, so you don't need to get right back to it. But Ray, I know you already said that you're drafting something new, and you can't tell us too much about it. But what's the next one that you said is coming up?
Yeah, my second YA. I guess we haven't officially announced that either, but like whatever. It just came. I just got the copy edits today.
We won't tell anyone.
Nobody watching this talk about it.
Don't tweet again.
But it is a queer YA contemporary about a cis girl who is kind of reeling from the sudden separation of her parents. And then when her best friend, a trans boy, gets his first girlfriend, that girlfriend's jealousy causes a rift in their friendship. So she has to figure out who she is with the sudden sort of dissolution of these very important relationships in her life, and kind of like rebuild her sense of self and friendships and all that after those events.
And that's coming out, you said, in 2022?
Yeah, I believe probably around the same time as BPAR, but there's no official release date yet.
Awesome. Thank you. Zabay, do you have anything coming up that you're allowed to tell us?
Yes. So I have 2 books coming out next year, and one of them is another YA contemporary rom-com. It's about a non-binary actor who enters a fake relationship with their co-star in order to persuade the showrunners not to kill off their on-screen FF couple. So it's about
it's so good.
You enter a fake relationship in order to save these fictional lesbians, and then you maybe wind up getting a little more feelings than you were bargaining for.
I'm in.
Yes, that'll be out next fall. And then the other one is my adult fantasy, Silkfire, which is an adult epic fantasy with lots of romance. And it's about a vengeful courtesan who is trying to backstab his aristocratic father for abandoning him when he was younger. And he accidentally is chosen by a god to restore the world. So yes, plenty of romance. It's got a poly romance. It's got lots of sword fights and actions and politics, and it's very steamy.
I was going to ask if any of you would ever think about writing fantasy. So I'm glad I didn't, because now we can ask that on the next panel when that book comes out. But
it's funny because I actually started out as a fantasy novel, and this was actually my first ever contemporary novel. And that's, it's funny, but I think there's like a lot of fantasy tropes that like snuck in there. Because it is about like 2 young men fighting to be kings. So.
That's a good point. Yeah. When you put it that way, just add some magic and you're good to go. Isaac, do you have anything coming up that is able to be discussed in a public forum?
So I've got a short story coming out in an anthology in 2022 to the Game On anthology, which is a YA sports anthology. Another one coming out in the anthology Cool Awkward Black, which is 2023. And I'm working on my next novel right now, which is like due next week. And I can't really say too much about it. I'll just say that it's queer. It's YA rom-com, and I call them my yeehaw gays. So that is my teaser for that book.
That's amazing. And I'm so sorry that you have to have a book come out and a deadline for another book in the same week. That's really rude of publishing to do that to you. I'm so sorry. I'll write a strongly worded letter to someone for you. Okay, so if anyone is watching and you didn't see the beginning of this, I just want you to know it will be on the One More Page YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch it from the beginning. You can share it and show it to all your friends. You can host a screening of it in your driveway on a projector and charge $5 for admission. I won't see you, I promise. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you all for being here. Again, I put the link in the chat there. You can go to onemorepagebooks.com and you can find these authors' books. We have copies available. We'll ship them to you, like I said, or you can do a pickup. They'll be signed in a few days. And I think, Ray, we're going to get book plates. So even though you are across the country, we will have books available. And if not, I'll just write a little note in it that says, pretend Ray signed this, please read it, thanks. So yeah, thank you all again so much. I'm going to give you another home round of applause. And happy Pride Month to everyone. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Megan, for commenting. Awesome. All right. See you all next time.